Yes, so we're pausing here to talk about the World Affairs Council. I'm standing in the alcove to the World Affairs Council building. The building is known as the World Affairs Council building, which is home to 4 nonprofit organizations, and the most important one by size is the World Affairs Council. The World Affairs Council came into existence as an organization in 1945 at the same time as the founding of the United Nations. It may come as a surprise to learn that the United Nations came into existence here in San Francisco in May of '45. At the end of the Second War, the League of Nations was reconstituted, reformulated, and again comes into existence here in order to provide San Franciscans with an opportunity to discuss what the United Nations itself was officially discussing in the Veterans Hall. The Veterans Hall and Opera House were the original United Nations building. This council was created so that San Franciscans could unofficially deliberate what was being officially talked about across town. And it lives on in that capacity, so there's speakers from around the world talking about UN sorts of issues. The United Nations is, like the United States Constitution, about an organization. That is, the UN Charter is not about people, it's about how to run a corporation. And the U.S. Constitution is similarly minded. And just as the United States needed something to refer to the rights of the people within the country, and that's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, similarly it was recognized quite early on that the United Nations needed some protections for the citizens of the countries that were members of the United Nations. And so, as it turns out, in 1948, the United Nations met again here in San Francisco to come up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And among those rights are the right to freedom of movement, right to freedom of belief, whether religious or secular or whatever, however one wants to construe that, your right to work, a right to housing. You are never explicitly declared to have, however, a right to land. It never shows up here. Interestingly, you never have a right to land. You have a right to everything on top of the land, having to do with the land, but not the land itself. Why is that? My own supposition is that the word land does not show up in this document because the French and British Empire still existed in 1948. And to have, with those 2 members of the Security Council, to have talked about the right to land would have meant the dissolution of the empires immediately on the very next day. If land is not a guaranteed right, well, what does that really signify? Well, I think it signifies a great deal. If you have a right to housing but not a right to land, where are you going to put that house? If you have a right to work but not a right to land, where are you going to work if somebody else owns that land and says, clear off? If you have a right to freedom of thought but not a right to land, somebody could say, you can think whatever you want to, you just have to do it in Germany. You can't do it in Syria any longer. You can't do it here in California, you've got to take it to Michigan. I want to supply 2 examples for your consideration to illustrate just how powerful I believe this geographic question is, that is, security and geography. For that group of people who, for those people who consider that place now known as Palestine as home, if there were no Jews in Palestine, the Hebrew people, the Palestinian peoples would have no problem with the Jewish people. The issue for Palestine is not that Jews exist, it's that they exist in that place, which the Palestinian people consider ours. Or looked at in the other direction, in that place known to many people today as Israel, if there were no Palestinians there, the Jewish people have no problem on book with either Islam, with the Arab peoples generally, or with Palestinians. The issue is that piece of land. It's a geographic question. Where do you occupy? Another example would be Northern Ireland, historically. If there were no Catholics in Northern Ireland, the Protestants in the UK have no problem with Catholics existing. They have a problem with Catholics in that piece of land. Or, looked at the other way, if there were no Protestants in Northern Ireland, the Catholics wouldn't have problem today with Protestants as such. They just have a problem with Protestants in that piece of land in the UK. It's a geographic question. Whatever the segment of the population is that's being oppressed, where does that population have a right to exist? And we'll begin our exploration of San Francisco's contribution to this question at this corner.